So this is going to be your geoscope for the upcoming new moon in Cancer that happens on the 20th of July 2020. So lots of twos in this number. Now this is a follow-up to the solstice solar eclipse that we had on the 21st of June. It's in the same sign. The main difference being that the solstice solar eclipse happened in the early degrees of Cancer, and this happens in the late degrees of Cancer. So they're almost bookmarking the sign on, kind of either side. The other thing to say is that your ruler Neptune is going to be quite active within the week that follows this particular lunar cycle. So, I think you can expect it to be a fairly eventful lunar month, and also just to say that the way that it starts is not necessarily the way that it's likely to end, and that's because it seems to be, from what I've seen so far and my interpretation of the Sabian symbol, it seems to be a kind of a liminal cycle where there's a lot of twinning, a lot of mirroring, and a lot of duality at work. So in that sense, I think it will be similar to the some of the other lunar phases that we've had, particularly when Venus in Gemini was active, and during the full moons that we've had both in Sagittarius and Capricorn. But anyway, let's see what comes out in your reading, and we'll sort of take things from there. So also just to say that if you've been enjoying these readings and you want to, perhaps learn more about geomancy, or perhaps start doing readings like this for yourself, I have actually produced an ebook which you can find out details about in the description box below. There's a link to my website where you can either purchase the book, or you can download the free conversion chart that I've put up there. Right, I think that's shuffled quite well. Let's see. Let's cut the cards. Okay. So first out is a missio. So Pisces, it seems as though you've got either a particular person on your mind, or you're just feeling a little bit low. And that's because we've got a missio here, which is all about loss. Now, it can be the breakup of a relationship. This is Venus in Taurus energy, so it is often associated with separations or breakups, but it can also be about just feeling that sense of something just being out of reach, unattainable. So possibly there's been either a kind of a career option, or a path that you have been pursuing that hasn't really gone anywhere for perhaps reasons completely out of your control, but there also may be an element here of self-sabotage. So that's just something to bear in mind, but we'll find out more as we get more information. So interesting. Now I think Libra got the same geometric figure here. So you might have planets in Libra, or you might have your rising sign in Libra, for example. So Acquisitio is coming out in your 4th house. So this is roots, family, as well as home and ancestral heritage. So this is bloodlines, as well as also what legacies, basically what we inherit from parents. And Acquisitio is actually it's interesting. It's the other benefic. So we've got Venus here, which is the lesser benefic, and this is Jupiter, which is the greater benefic. But it's Jupiter in its day rulership. So this is Jupiter in Sagittarius, and Acquisitio is interestingly the opposite sign to a missio. So if you have a look, you will see that the geomantic figures are the mirror images of each other. We've got a missio, which is 1 2 1 2, and we've got Acquisitio, which is 2 1 2 1. So these are what I was talking about. This is the twinning energy that I'm talking about, the sort of mirroring energy. It's kind of swings and roundabouts. So while you may have lost something on a kind of individual or personal level, you seem to be gaining something when it comes to home and family. So, this could be an inheritance, for example. It could be a legacy. So it's possible, even though we don't really want to think about that too much, that you've lost a relative recently, and that this may have resulted in some kind of legacy, perhaps the inheritance of a property. But the other way that this energy can work is it can sometimes mean an extension of a family or a home. So you could either have kind of decided to move to a bigger property, or perhaps there are new additions to the family, either through marriage or through perhaps a pregnancy or a birth. But again, we'll find out more as we go along. Oh, interesting. Okay, so 7th house is the kind of mirror image of the 1st house. So that, well, whilst this is about you, this is about others. So this is self versus others. Now, it's interesting because in the 7th house, here we've got conjuncture, which is literally conjunction. So it's about coming together. And being the 7th house, it's with one other person, because the 7th house is about partnership. It's about one-to-one relationship. So it's interesting. We've got this loss on the one hand, but then we've got this kind of gain, or this coming together on the other. So very often conjuncture is about marriage. It can also be about the union of opposites. So this can be about compromise, for example. Interesting that it is Mercury in Virgo, because Virgo is your natural 7th house kind of zodiac sign. This is you, Pisces, and this is Virgo. So on some level there does seem to be an alliance perhaps being formed. I mean, it could be a business partnership. It's generally if it is a professional relationship, it's usually one that we have a contract with. We sign a contract with this type of relationship. It's long lasting. It involves obligations on both sides. So it can be somebody like a solicitor, an accountant, something like that, or a business partner that you in a joint venture with. But usually it is committed relationships. So it's interesting. It does look as though, as I say, again, it's repeating this idea of where swings and roundabouts. So where you may have lost something or someone, you seem to be kind of gaining when it comes to family and committed relationships. So I don't know, possibly you have decided to take a relationship to the next level. Perhaps you're kind of getting serious with somebody, or there's been an engagement, for example, if that is something that you believe in. But we'll find out more, because the 5th house is the house of lovers, and that is where the new moon is going to be falling. So let's see what other geomantic figures come out. Okay, interesting. So this is 10th house, and this is often about career and our kind of public face. So it's often to do with our reputation, kind of career, in terms of career. But it can also be, if you're in the public eye, it can be how we're sort of viewed by other people, by society, or if we are a sort of a key member of a community, such as a community leader, leader of a political party, or if we run a charity. This is all about being in the public eye. But equally, it can be about our kind of future goals or aspirations. So it can often be about soul purpose, which isn't always necessarily linked to career. So here we've got Fortuna Minor, which is the Sun in Leo, but it's the Sun in Leo, the Sun below the horizon. So it's not as strong as Fortuna Major, but it's still important, and often what it signifies is support from others. Often it's kind of protection or favors from higher up. So this is kind of fortune smiling on us in the form of people looking out for us. And it, as I said, is often people in high places. So on some level you are feeling very supported. So again, there's this sort of reiteration of, even though you might be feeling kind of sort of that you've lost something, there's every indication that in other areas of your life you are very supported, by potentially committed partners, by the public, and by your colleagues at work, your boss, and as I say, higher ups, and then also by family. So Yes, this may have something to do with this, with a sense of perspective that needs to shift, but we'll find out more once I've done the conversion. So I'm just going to pause while I do that quickly. Welcome back, Pisces. So let's get into your reading. I've done all the conversions, and we can now kind of proceed. So it's let's kind of pick up we know where we left off. So we've got a missio, and it's repeated in your eighth house. So this is kind of where your mind is as we move into this new lunar cycle. And as I say, the way that you start the lunar cycle is not necessarily the way that you're going to finish it. But as you're kind of coming into this new energy, this new moon, there seems to be the sense of loss, or feeling like you're a bit of a loser, or that you've kind of lost out. As I say, feeling that there's a sense of transience, that things don't last. I think that's one of the ways that you can think about a missio, because missio is really about the physical world and about life in the 3D. And one of the sort of the major kind of qualities, or the nature of the 3D of embodied life, is that we born, we will die. So there is the sense that within nature there are these cycles, and that things never stay the same, and change is kind of the only constant. So it seems that your main feelings of loss seem to be concentrated around the eighth house. Now, the eighth house is the house of sex, death, taxes, as well as divorce settlements. So this is kind of alimony. It can also be things like inheritances, and then bank loans. It's also the house of kind of insecurity and secrets. So it can be the house of vice. So sometimes, if we have addictive behavior, it can show up here. So, porn, drugs, alcohol, something that we don't want people to know about, kind of secrets, can sometimes show up here, as they can in the 12th house. So there's this different sense of feeling low as we kind of move into this new moon cycle. But new moon cycles are all about beginnings. So there's a sense of an ending followed by a beginning, and I've seen this in almost all the readings that I've done so far, that there seems to be this, as I said, this twinning energy. So often we'll kind of come into this new moon with a residue of that lunar eclipse still kind of hanging in the air. So that sense of loss, of having to let go, of processing things that are leaving our reality, and that's to be expected, because it was really ending an 18 months to 2.5 years cycle for us. So, and that's not going to happen overnight. It's not necessarily going to happen within the 2 appointed weeks for that sort of lunar cycle, that waning moon cycle. So I do feel as though, as I say, we've got indications of that in the reading too. We've got Counter Draconis sort of twice, and Counter Draconis is about endings, release, the kind of the culmination of a karmic cycle or contract. So this is sort of finishing things up, learning important lessons, and kind of getting clear about why a situation had to happen, why somebody was in our life, or simply your interaction with that particular person or situation kind of coming to an end. So it's interesting that we got it in the 12th house and we got it in the 9th house. Now, these are two houses associated to a large extent with spirit. So the 9th house tends to be our beliefs, as well as our relationship to the spiritual realms through things like religion, divination, dreams, channeling, etc. But it can also be about higher perspective. So learning wisdom gained through experience, where we learn, we kind of see the meaning in why certain situations have happened. There's this definite sense of wisdom and understanding, as opposed to just sort of data and facts. So it does seem as though you are very consciously aware of the fact that you have been learning important soul lessons, and this seems to be on an unconscious level too, because the 12th house is the house often of the unconscious, but also it's the house of psyche, and psyche, of course, is not just about our mind but our soul. So this is where we connect to the collective. So this sort of not the hive mind, but it's more kind of source energy. So where we connect to the sort of the universal web of life. So I do feel as though on some level this can sometimes be about, uncomfortable or retreat, for example. So it can be about spiritual retreat. It can sometimes be about institutionalization, so hospitals, mental asylums, libraries, that kind of thing. But it's where we kind of go to sort of cloister. We go to kind of withdraw from the world, and very often that is to kind of contemplate. Sometimes it's to grieve, and just to sort of reconnect with our internal with our internal sense of truth, and our connection to the divine and to life, and all that is. So this the kind of the universal life force. So I do feel as though you are probably going to start this lunar cycle in a bit of hermit mode, and that's going to be your first sort of instinct while you are processing whatever it is that is kind of leaving your reality. But then we've also got in the house of the new moon, we've got Caput Draconis, which is about new cycle starting. So this again is the mirror opposite of Cauda Draconis. So this is the north node and this is the south node of the moon. So yes, just as as the saying goes, as one door closes, another one opens. So as one karmic cycle comes to an end, so a new one starts. And we've got this new moon, we've got the sun and the moon in Cancer in your 5th house. So it is kind of reminding you about the new 6-month cycle that started at the solstice eclipse back on the 21st of June, that you do have this kind of new cycle starting. Now the 5th house is about a couple of things. It's about passion, it's about joy, it's about kind of having fun. So it's often about holidays, hobbies, as well as children and childhood, because that's where we connect with that childlike playfulness and that ability to just sort of like be in the moment. It can be about children, and it can also be about new love relationships as well as creativity, because very often when we are creating something, it's similar to giving birth. So that's why there's no kind of difference made here between biological children and sort of creative offspring, as it were. So it does seem as though on some level here you are starting fresh, and so it's kind of interesting that we've got a lot of Rubeus here. We've got Rubeus repeated 1, 2, 3 times. So when any geomantic figure is repeated so many times, I always tend to take notice. And Rubeus, to a larger extent, is about kind of passion and life force. So Rubeus means red, and it is Mars in Scorpio. So this is kind of a deep connection to life and to the feeling centers. Now sometimes this can be a good thing, sometimes it can be a bad thing. On the one hand, if we've been feeling a little bit disconnected and numb, then it can help reconnect us back to the life force and kind of get us going again. But if it's been around for a long time, sometimes what it can do is it can lead to self-destructive behavior, toxic behavior, as well as obsessiveness. So when you kind of get into that mindset of you kind of ruminate and you brood and you go over and over and over things, kind of round and round and round, and you don't seem to sort of get anywhere, and it just generates more negative feeling. That can sometimes be Rubeus, because the symbol for Rubeus is a chalice turned upside down. So this is the cups have been spilt, and there's this sense of sometimes regret, and this may kind of feed into a Messiah, which is about this sense of loss. Now it's in a couple of, let's have a look at the houses that it's in. So we've got it twice in your outcome, and then we've got it once in your 11th house. Now it's interesting because as the sun and the moon make a conjunction to each other at new moon, they will be opposed almost exactly by Saturn. So Saturn in Capricorn will be opposing the sun and the moon at this particular new moon phase. So it will have a flavor, definitely carrying over a flavor or a residue over from that lunar eclipse in Capricorn that we had at the beginning of July, which was very Capricorn heavy. And of course Saturn had just ingressed back into Capricorn, just prior to that particular lunar phase. So Capricorn was activated and Saturn was quite prominent. Now, we also have Jupiter quite active in this house. So we've got Saturn and Jupiter both very active in this house. Now this is the house of friendships, of group associations. So it can be social networks. It can also be professional networks. So it can be, you know, professional associations, for example. But any kind of group activity that has a kind of higher purpose. So or that has a social element to it. So, you know, anything from social media right through to things like humanitarian causes, charities, as well as political parties, that type of thing. So it's quite a broad house. The Greeks used to call it the house of the good spirit. So it used to be very much associated with the guardian angel, or this sort of your main spirit guide. So, you know, that may also be prominent or pertinent, given that we've got the 9th and the 12th houses kind of activated by this counter draconis, this south node energy. So it could be that on some level you are kind of up leveling, and you are moving on to a new spirit guide if you are that way inclined. But on a more mundane level, this can often be, as I say, to do with friendships or with people that you are in some kind of group association with. So Rubeus here, you know, it can mean sort of a couple of things. It could mean, for example, that you have a long-standing feud, or kind of dislike, like a personality clash with somebody within a group that you belong to, for example. And maybe there's quite a lot of like backstabbing, or just a sense of backbiting. You know, you often kind of gossip about each other, or you do whatever you can to undermine that person, and vice versa. Or it can be, you know, as I say, passion. So this can be attraction for perhaps somebody that you have a platonic relationship with, somebody who's in your circle, your social media circle, for example. And given that we've got a new cycle starting in the 5th house, you could definitely read it as potentially the start of a new romantic relationship. So you've got a fresh start happening here, and perhaps you've got a bit of a passion for somebody that you are friends with, or who's in your social circle. That's definitely one way that you could read this energy. As I say, the other one could be that you have some new creative project starting, and it involves an element of working together with other people, and there may be passions may be running high, shall we put it that way, within the group. Maybe there's a lot of infighting, or kind of volatility, you know, where there's a lot of like kind of bickering, or, you know, something of that ilk. Or it could be that you're all very, very driven, and that you all have this strong sense that you want to kind of achieve something together. And that may be why you're being called to kind of work with people, to sort of form alliances with people, to cooperate, you know, as opposed to kind of do your own thing. But on the other hand, this could also be, if we're reading this as a new romantic relationship, perhaps it is saying that this whatever this new start is, has the potential to kind of go the distance, that it could end up, you know, at some point in a long-term commitment. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, there are a couple of transits that I think are going to be quite important, because they happen to your ruler Neptune, as I mentioned at the beginning of the reading. So the first is a sextile from Neptune to Jupiter, or vice versa. So Jupiter is also in the sign of Capricorn, so it's also in this house. And I think that kind of reinforces the sort of the two-way energy here. So this, as I say, Rubeus could be interpreted positively or negatively. So positively towards Jupiter, negatively towards Saturn. But Saturn, you know, to a large extent, is about karmic rebalancing, and I do feel that energy is kind of carrying over, as I say, from the lunar eclipse. So it is possible that as a result of something that happened at the lunar eclipse, there is a kind of karmic rebalancing happening within the social group. So if, say, for example, you have lost somebody, or there's been a kind of a breakup, then, you know, that does impact your social group. Sometimes friends, you know, feel like they have to pick sides, and, you know, all that kind of thing. There can be quite a lot of volatility happening in that area. But the other way that you could read it is this Jupiter-Neptune sextile. So this is positive energy happening between your first house and your 11th house. Jupiter is about expansion, so it's similar to this energy here, but it's, given that Jupiter and Neptune are retrograde, I kind of think that this is more of an internal developmental experience rather than an external one. So I think it's more than likely going to result in a sort of an opening up or a kind of an inner expansion where you start to feel less, kind of sad and like a loser or stuck, and more like there's hope. So kind of hope is kind of returning. There's a sense of optimism again about the future. Miracles, you're kind of open to miracles, to things improving basically, particularly on an emotional and a kind of psycho-spiritual level. And that's why we may have movement here in your 9th and your 12th house. The other aspect that's happening to Neptune is Venus will be making a square to Neptune. So Venus is here in your 4th house of family, and it will be making a square to Neptune, which is in your 1st house. So you could see this in a couple of ways. Now, we've had 2 passes already of this Venus-Neptune square. We had one in May, we had another one in June, and this is the final one. So for me, when we get to the 3rd pass of a major transit, this is kind of the consolidation or integration of whatever it is that you have been dealing with over the course of these squares, so from May through until the end of July. So I kind of feel as though this is sort of like not going to be news to you, whatever this thing is. Squares do tend to be quite difficult, they're quite challenging energy, and they do often call for us to make adjustments. And when we are talking about a Venus-Neptune square, very often these are about an adjustment to our expectations. So we have to try and be very careful to avoid unrealistic expectations, a sense of disappointment that can then lean towards victimhood, as well as loss from the outside, because Venus is not retrograde. Venus is now direct. So it could be that somebody's deceived us. It could be that we feel disappointed or let down by somebody, perhaps a family member, or it could have something to do with having to sacrifice something, give something up. And if you are in the process of a breakup, maybe this has to do with like having to sacrifice I don't know, the family home, to give up custody of your children, things like that, which may be why we've got a new cycle starting here. But I don't think that it's necessarily going to be that sort of drastic, because we do have Acquisitio here, which is really quite positive. So but as I say, you'll know what this is, because this is the 3rd and final pass of this particular square. So I think you'll already know what it is that this is closing out, and I suspect that it has more to do with expectations and a kind of an adjustment of, perhaps kind of going, well, maybe I shouldn't have been so naive, or maybe I've needed to sort of like grow up a little bit and realize that that kind of I don't want to say magical thinking, because it isn't really magical thinking. It's more sort of like a distortion in one's thinking or values, that couldn't continue. And this may be why we've got Venus in Taurus, this emissio energy here, that there's a sense that, whatever the situation is that you're having to let go of, couldn't possibly continue, and that you were kind of kidding yourself to think that it could. So I think that's more what that kind of energy is about. But ultimately, it's going to be beneficial. There is a sort of an upswing in your 4th house. So, when it comes to family and home and that kind of thing. So, I don't think worry about that too much. And then, as I say, Neptune to a large extent is about dissolving. So it can very often be about sort of like letting go, releasing, also just surrendering to the inevitable. So perhaps surrendering to the truth of something, no longer being in denial, for example, or just going with the flow and deciding not to resist something. And that could be, your feelings for a friend that you you may be, terrified to say something about in case you could rock the boat or ruin the friendship or whatever. That's one example. Or if you have been having a feud with somebody, just letting it go and saying, well, is it really worth kind of having this sort of petty squabbling and that kind of thing? Maybe it's just time to let it go and have an easier life. So that can be this sort of energy. It's definitely line of least resistance type of stuff. So that's something to bear in mind. But this Rubaeus energy, as I say, is very emphasized in your outcomes. So I do think that it could be something that is probably more to do with a kind of a life-affirming energy as opposed to a negative energy, because this is, you're releasing stuff already at the beginning of this process, and something new is then kind of coming in. So yes, I think that's just something to sort of take into consideration. The other thing to say is that we are within a week of this new moon, and around about the time of the Jupiter-Neptune sextile, we are going to be having the opening of the 888 portal. So that starts around about the 26th of July and will peak on the 8th of August, and then start to sort of phase out over the week that follows that. So the 888 portal is very much about coming into your power. It's about sovereignty, it's about transformation, it's about a balancing of light and dark energies, and it's also about kind of personal power, so empowerment. So it's that sort of that 8 energy, that sort of very transformational kind of energy, which is 8th house stuff. So I do feel like you're going to be working through whatever this is. It's not going to kind of last past this particular lunar month. But then you end with this very interesting kind of populace. So you've got Rubaeus twice, and then you've got populace, and isn't it interesting that populace is also the moon in Cancer, which is the same as this particular moon phase. So the moon in Cancer here is it kind of expressed through crowds or group thinking. So it's about community, it's about coming together with others. So again, it's maybe emphasizing that 11th house Jupiter and Saturn, that maybe it's better to cooperate and sort of work with people rather than against them. And if people pull together, that they overcome difficulties much easier than if they try and kind of go it alone. But I do think that whatever this is, that there's a lot of harmony in this reading. If we look at your main relationship houses, for example, 4th house family, we've got Acquisitio. If we look at colleagues and pets, we've got Puella, which is also very positive. So this is about harmony and success in relationships. We've got Conjunctio in your 7th house. So again, it's about kind of alliances, coming together with others, working with people, cooperation. And then again in your 10th house, support from others. So this could link to the populace. It could be that you kind of get public support for whatever it is that you're doing, that feeling of being supported by the universe, or being supported by the people that you, like voters, for example, that you serve. So overall, Pisces, not a bad reading at all. I think, as I say, that the way that you finish this particular lunar month is not the way that you'll start it. So if it doesn't start particularly well, just know that endings will be followed by new beginnings, and that things are going to start looking up. Particularly if we look at the key areas of your life, family, things definitely look like they're kind of looking up, and there's gain coming in. There is a sense of positive karma coming your way. Same with work. Puella is all about cooperation, things going really well in your daily life, your health, and work relationships. Conjunctio coming together with one other person and it working quite well. And then Fortuna Minor, support from others, particularly in the domain of career and public life. So all in all, I think quite a positive reading. The only kind of downside being this Amisio here and Cassia here. So these are the two houses to do with income and possession. So it is possible that you are going to be feeling a little bit financially restricted. This is 2nd house, but it can also be about a blow to self-esteem. So because this is not just income and earned income and possessions, but also how we value ourselves, so self-worth. So it could be that you feel a little bit taken for a ride, for example, on some level. maybe somebody's betrayed you, or your trust, and you're feeling a little bit wounded about that, and maybe that's what you're brooding about. But I think, as I say, you'll get over it. There's these card of Draconis here, which is kind of suggesting a release, and then we've got this new start happening for you at the new moon. So I think just have faith, go with that wonderful Neptune Venus energy, allow the transitions and the transformations of the 888 portal to happen, and I think you will really feel in a very different place, much more optimistic and hopeful by the time we get to the end of this particular lunar month. So I hope that's been helpful, Pisces. Do hit the like button if you've enjoyed this. If it's resonated, I'd love to hear from you in the comments, and I'll catch you again in a couple of weeks for your next forecast.